Good evening, everyone. My name is Darrell Green, Superintendent of Schools for Red Clay. We're here this evening for a class size waiver presentation. According to Delaware Code, class size for students in grades K to 3 should not exceed 22 students per instructor by the last day of October. In the event that a student-teacher ratio exceeds this number, the statute permits the local board to vote on the waiver of class size on or before December the 1st. And so we're here this evening to present to the board some extenuating and special circumstances during this year as we are transitioning from a full remote learning environment into a hybrid learning environment that's requiring us to put forth waivers to the board. And so again, any local LEA that needs additional time to submit these waivers, we're granted the opportunity to do so. But again, per the law, we have to be in accordance to do it before December the 1st. So we're here to present to you this evening at the November 18th board meeting. I'm going to turn it over right now to Dr. Amy Grundy, who is the director of our elementary ed, to present class size waiver report.
All righty, good evening, President Thompson, Superintendent Green, members of the board. So tonight I am here to request a K-3 class size waiver. But before I share the data, it's important to share some acknowledgements and some considerations that are helpful to create the context around this request. So back in March, Superintendent Green shared that we are providing an educational response to a health crisis. And I reflect on that daily because it still rings very, very true. Everything about this situation is less than ideal. So this school year has been incredibly challenging in so many ways for the entire Red Clay community. So as I make the following acknowledgements, please note that they are in the context of the K-3 waiver request, and my gratitude goes way beyond what I mentioned tonight. So Tony, if you can just change that slide. So we are requesting the waiver, and then the next slide, please. So we basically started school twice this year. Once back in August, and then again in November. We planned for phase 2. We developed plans, we communicated plans, we revisited plans, and we adjusted plans. We listened to feedback from our community, from parents, from families. We had students send us videos and educators. We listened to all our stakeholders. And we balanced this with the adherence to the safety protocols and the guidance that we've been given from the governor, from DPH. So this was definitely a balancing act. We were and we remain committed to giving families viable options. This, however, presents logistical challenges that requires complex problem solving and some difficult decisions to be made. So with this in mind, I first want to acknowledge our students. Our students have adapted to new ways of learning, new ways of interacting with each other. They've endured transitions, and in some cases, they've had to establish new relationships with teachers and also make new friends. I want to acknowledge our families. Our families were faced with a very difficult choice to make for their student, and it was even more so difficult because of the current environment that we live in. I want to acknowledge our teachers. A saying that always rings true to me is that there's no tired like end of year teacher tired. Well, I'm pretty confident that there is no tired like teaching during a pandemic tired. Staff have had to do everything differently. Everything requires them to think differently. Teaching requires a different approach. Planning requires a different approach. Assessment requires a different approach. Everything that they do requires them to do things differently. And all the while, they have to keep at the forefront their own well-being and the well-being of their family. And they're doing a tremendous job. I want to acknowledge staff who were assigned to roles that were new to them in order to implement phase 2. Their responsibilities changed and they're making it happen. Some staff were required to teach remotely, yet they preferred to teach in person. And some staff were asked to teach in person and they preferred to teach remotely. Regardless of the environment, the job has changed, and quite frankly, people feel a sense of loss. Our administrators have been working tirelessly too. They were faced with making these difficult decisions and navigating the logistics in order to implement phase 2. They were tasked with implementing 3 options. They needed to find facilitators for accelerated ed. They needed to identify teachers to teach in the remote environment. They needed to identify teachers to teach on campus. Or in some circumstances, they needed to ask teachers to do both. And they also needed to consider the accommodations that some teachers were given. And they certainly wanted to address and acknowledge teacher preference while they were making these decisions. They were tasked for creating schedules for online students, and they were tasked with creating schedules for on-campus students. All the while, they wanted to minimize the disruptions for students. They were tasked with designing and implementing safety protocols for on-campus learning. All this prior to phase 2. They worked day, night, and weekends. Had one new assistant principal actually ask her principal, is it always going to be like this? And I'm really hopeful that it's not always going to be like this. Everybody is truly moving mountains for our students and to implement teaching and learning during this pandemic. So, as you consider the need for the waiver, it's also important to consider and note the following. The regulation from DOE, it takes a snapshot of our class size data on October 30th, the last day in October. This was a Friday this year. It's the last school day in October, which this year was October 30th, a Friday. And this coincided with the end of the first marking period. So it was the same day that our administrators were shuffling our class lists. They needed to make sure that they were accommodating the on-campus requests and the online requests. Again, this was on a Friday, and the transition to phase 2 occurred on Monday, November 2nd. So as a result of the timing, I just want to acknowledge the following. Some of the students may have been shuffled after the snapshot was taken. Another important consideration is the unit count, which typically happens on September 30th, happened this week. So after this week, some students may fall off the roster. Another important thing to note is that the data that you'll see tonight is all inclusive. It includes Accelerate Ed, it includes on-campus, and it includes online. I want to emphasize too, that if these were typical times, and had we not needed to shift to a hybrid model, we would not have needed a waiver. But these are certainly not typical times. I do want you to know that there is not a class on campus that needs a waiver. All the classes that require a waiver are in the remote environment. And the administrators have worked very closely with their leadership teams and the remote teachers and the district to create models for their classes. There is no one-size-fits-all model because administrators and their teams needed to make decisions using their resources and to address their student needs and the programming that was offered in their schools. So some are meeting as cohorts. For example, if there is a remote class size of 28, some schools have opted to meet in 2 cohorts of 14. English language arts, social emotional learning, and math are taught synchronously, interfacing with the teacher on Zoom, and science and social studies are taught primarily asynchronously. Some are meeting as whole groups, but they're using their specialists, their special education teachers, reading specialists, to facilitate small breakout groups to meet individual student needs for targeted instruction. Wednesdays have been designed to help to meet the needs of our students in the remote environment and any individual programming needs or student needs that haven't been met throughout the week. The members of the C&I department, the curriculum and instruction department, are helping in the planning of asynchronous lessons so that they're available for teachers to just grab and use. Schools did need some autonomy to make these decisions to address the logistics in their context. So now we'll take a look at the data. So this is the DOE uniform reporting method. And based on the October 30th snapshot, we do in fact need to request a waiver. However, 92% of our classes do not require a waiver. That's 285 out of 311 sections. A total of 26 out of the 311 sections exceeded 22. They are all remote online classes, and that's around 8% of the total. If we look at just our remote classes, because those are the classes that require the waiver, we have 67 sections or 67 classes identified as remote sections. 41 out of 67, that's 61%, do not need a waiver. 24% of the remote sections do in fact have 26 or more students in them. The highest is 40 in K3 at North Star in one of the remote sections, and they are in fact teaching in 2 cohorts. Everything else is less than that. Not saying it's easy, but that is in fact, in the interest of transparency, the largest in K-3. 15% of the remote classes have 23 to 25 students. That's 10 out of the 67. And the following schools are the schools that require us to request a waiver. Brandywine Springs, they have 3 out of their 4 remote sections that require a waiver. Cook has one remote section that requires a waiver. Forest Oak has 2 remote sections that require a waiver. Heritage has 4 remote sections that require a waiver. Highlands has 1. Lewis has 3. Linden Hill has 6. The reason it has 6 is it's one of those schools that selected the model where a teacher may be teaching math in person in the morning and math remotely in the afternoon. So 2 sections have been identified as the remote section. So it's actually the same section, but it's listed twice. Marbrook has 1 section that requires us to request a waiver. North Star has 4. Richardson Park has 1. And those are the schools that are the reason that we need to request a waiver this evening. So with that, if there's any questions.
At Lewis, sorry. Yes. At Lewis, you just said 3 classes. How many students are in each class, please?
I can tell you that, I think. Lewis. In first grade, there's 31 students in the remote section. In second grade, 28. And in third grade, 31.
Okay.
And they have some whole group sections, but then they do break out into small groups in order to provide targeted instruction and the language instruction they have to account for as well.
Okay. So in them classrooms, I guess they have a para, somebody's in there with, no, this is all Zoom
Yes.
and remote, actually in the classroom, physical.
The physical classroom no classrooms require a waiver.
Okay, good, I
And
understand.
the remote environment, they've been very strategic in providing individual targeted supports. So they may do the whole group with that large number, but then when it comes time to support students in smaller groups with targeted instruction based on student need, they use the breakout function and other adults to help support those classes.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Can you explain the Linden Hill number again?
Yeah. So at Linden Hill, they have in kindergarten, for example, 2 groups of 25. And it's my understanding that it's because a teacher is teaching English language arts to a group of students in person, and then in the afternoon shifting and teaching the 25 students in the afternoon English language arts. And then another teacher is assigned the same 25 because she's doing math in person and then also in the afternoon. Or vice versa. The kids it worked.
Any other questions?
I do. Sorry. My computer wasn't working there. So, Amy, I have a question.
Sure.
So how many teachers would we need in order to make class size?
So I think we have 26 sections that do not meet the waiver of 22. And I think so it would be 26. And I worked with Jill earlier, so that would be about $2.6 million if we were to do that. And for para, it'd be half that. But the challenge is there's not available staff looking right now. It's very difficult to find staff to fill these positions. And then also how best to use them in the remote environment to meet student needs.
So, okay, and so I'm hearing you say we can't find the teachers even if we wanted to pay the 2.6 million?
There certainly has been challenges because we did hire a few additional staff members and it's not easy to find teachers at this point in time.
So there's a challenge finding teachers.
Correct,
And there's a cost that's involved.
correct.
And I know you mentioned 2.6 million. I know that's local. I believe that's local dollars.
When I worked with Jill earlier, yes.
So maybe Ms. Flory can explain it because I want to make sure I understand this unfunded mandate. I know the law says it's got to be 22 in K to 3. But there's an unfunded piece to this, and so I want to make sure we understand this, because there's obviously a huge financial component, even if we could find the teachers.
There is, and as Amy said, in a typical year, what we would do is in a class that had 25, by ratio, if we hired a paraprofessional, that would, in a kindergarten class, that adult would, the teacher would still teach the lessons, the second adult would help with motor skills and worksheets and manipulation and be that extra.
I can't hear you, Jill.
Have to hire, it wouldn't be the 2.6 million if you could satisfy with a para. In the remote environment, they don't operate the same way. And so when Amy's quoting the 2.6 million, it's truly the technicality of if you put, you know, another face on a Zoom screen in the remote environment. And so typically what we say is absolutely, you know, there's always that chart of you get one unit, and with that one unit that you earn for a student or a collection of students, you have to fund the psychologist, you have to fund the counselor, you have to fund the art teacher, and all of the ancillary services that go with it out of your unit count. Well, we know right now unit count is significantly down. So we don't have the money even to fund the staff. I mean, Jarrell and I are working on this right now. We're down 23 units over where we were last year. So we're trying to kind of make up or fill the hole rather than, I mean, I would tell you there's absolutely no way that $2.6 million locally could be found, even if you could find the teachers based on what we're seeing on the unit count.
And again, in full transparency, we are here before the board this evening to reflect the reality of what we're dealing with as a district. And so as the state has provided us with flexibility around the compulsory attendance law and really adjusting what an instructional day looks like, where there's a minimum of 3.5 hours of instruction, whether that would be synchronous and asynchronous, a combination. We've gotten flexibility around the unit count, which again, the unit count just closed, which typically would be September 30th. And thank you to Mr. Golder and all of the other administrators who worked through the unit count, Mrs. Grundy, Dr. Celestin, Deb Shepard, all of the staff members who really worked diligently to try to count every student in this environment where we're part remote, we're transitioning to hybrid. And the very thing that we didn't get flexibility on, and why we're here this evening, is the class size waiver, because the state literally on October 30th told us that we would not get any flexibility, and that's the same day that they captured the snapshot. And we listened to our community where they said they wanted red clay teachers supporting remote learning. We heard that we needed to keep class sizes for those who selected in person at a minimum so that we can adhere to safety. And the reality of it is, as we work as diligently as we can to meet all needs, the one need that we can't necessarily fulfill right now is where we have an abundance of students and families who have chosen remote. And again, I want to take my hat off, and I know Dr. Grundy alluded to the inequity or equity or equal, however you choose to look at it, the dynamic of what our teachers have to deal with in-person learning and what our remote staff have to deal with online learning. We're in a crisis. And I think we can't understate that enough, that we're in a pandemic, we're in a crisis, and as a district, we truly have tried our best and will continue to do our best to meet the needs of our students and our families. And we heard our families say that they wanted red clay teachers supporting that remote learning environment. That's what they had. Unfortunately, there's an imbalance because there's not an even split between who wanted in person versus who wanted remote. And ultimately, we still have to adhere to the state guidelines, even in a pandemic, where you would want flexibility around those situations, not for us to manipulate the system, but for us to truly provide the supports that are necessary to our community during this pandemic, again, which is a crisis. And so the numbers before you are the numbers before you. And we know what the local cost would be. We know we don't have that cost. As Ms. Flores just explained, unit count in and of itself is an issue in Red Clay, and it's becoming an issue across the state. As students who we would have traditionally been able to count in person, the remote learning environment, unfortunately, hasn't worked out for them. And I think that's the trend and the takeaway from where we'll see unit count. And so, again, we're asking the board to see the numbers for what they are We did not present a waiver to you last year. We did not have a waiver request. And had we not been dealing with COVID, we wouldn't be before you today asking for a waiver request. And so all of the requests are for those who are in remote. And again, thank you to all of our building level leadership teams and administrators for really being creative. So in the Linden Hill case, they decided as a team that that would be more conducive to supporting learning and maximizing the resources within their particular building. And each building has their unique nature, and schools have received that flexibility to be able to meet it. Is it inadequate in some instances? Yes, the world we're living in right now is full of inadequacies. And so this is the presentation that's before you, and really asking for you to support the class size waiver request.
So Darrell, I have a question, and then Dr. Bohm has a question, so she can go right after me. But are we doing anything, even if I know we're not meeting the class size at this point, but is there some help that's being provided to those teachers that are remote with the large class sizes?
Yes, they've either cohorted, they're being supported by their administrators, they're being supported by additional resources. We've used every resource available in Red Clay. So much so that my staff had to actually go out and support a school. Miss Flore, who is our CFO, again, was in a school working car lines. So I think our community needs to be clear that, as we deal with this situation and really try to address the ongoing needs and challenges that we'll continue to face, because each day brings a unique challenge. And so it's not that we're not addressing it or we just group kids into a virtual world with no support. We're supporting them with the available resources that we have at this time.
And now, as I mentioned, Dr. Bohm has a question, and she's remote.
So thank you for the report, Amy. I wanted to know exactly how many students are we talking about altogether?
Students.
Each of those 26 rooms that you want a total of number of students that are remote?
Yes. How many? Yes.
So
How many
roughly,
students are we talking about?
I don't have that figure here, but I can certainly follow up with how many elementary students we have in each of the environments.
Okay, so you can get that to me during the regular session prior to us voting?
I can certainly try.
Thank you. And my other question is, have you all talked to our CEA? Have you talked to the educators? Have you talked to the parents? Are they in support of this?
and so we meet with RCA on a weekly basis. We know that there's pressure on teachers who are teaching remote, but there's also pressures on the educators who are also in person. And so we've had these conversations. This isn't an ideal situation. And again, so we have had conversations.
But are they supporting it? Are they supporting the request for the class size waiver?
We didn't ask for a formal support from our CEA, and nor have they come out to speak out against it. So there hasn't been a conversation or request for a formal waiver. And in essence, we asking you because this is what the state is requiring us to do.
And the paras, has the district talked to the paras?
And so I don't necessarily know, again, we haven't had in-depth conversations about pairs with regards to class size waiver. The other issue that we also have is the fact that there are staff members who also need telework or ADA requirements that really doesn't give us the normal staffing that we would have in a traditional or normal environment. And so this is a balancing act. And with the number of requests that we had for in-person learning, and then also the adjustment to those who requested remote learning, the numbers are what they are, and they're being presented and laid out to the board today, understanding that some people have just rolled up their sleeves and are doing the work that's necessary, understanding that this isn't an ideal situation. So we haven't asked for formal endorsements from RCEA or the pairs.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Dr. Grundy?
Thank you.
Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much, Dr. Grundy. Oop, lots of feedback. Okay.
Hearing that there are no other questions, the time is now 6:58. That concludes the class size waiver presentation. Again, thank you, Dr. Grundy. Thank you to all of our building level educators, those who are, again, either in person or remote. And more importantly, thank you to our building level administrators who have done a yeoman's job of the balancing act and really doing everything on the front line to not only support educators, but support families as we transition through the various iterations of learning environments, whether that would be remote, hybrid, in person, or combination of both. So that concludes the presentation.
And I would echo that thanks to everyone.
One more minute.
I'll wait till it's okay.
School's going well. Yeah, busy. Yeah, I'm at Newark all day, and then I
Okay,
either
7.
start Zoom.
Good evening and welcome, a warm welcome to everyone. My name is Kathy Thompson, President of the Red Clay School District Board of Education. The board is very thankful you've come out tonight and grateful to have you here. The November 18th, 2020 board meeting of the Red Clay School District is called to order. It is 7 p.m. This meeting is being held electronically and in person. On March 12, 2020, Governor Carney issued a declaration of state of emergency for the state of Delaware due to a public health threat. The state of emergency allows all public meetings of executive branch public bodies, including boards of education, to be conducted electronically and/or in person, either by means of telephone conference call or video conference call. The information regarding this meeting, including information on how to access the meeting electronically and in person, was published on November 12, 2020 on the Red Clay School District website under the public notices sections. Individuals may participate in this meeting via Zoom conferencing or in person and may speak by completing the public comment form that was available on the website and submitting at least 1/2 hour prior to the start of the meeting or filling out a green sheet here at the meeting. In order to speak at the meeting, you must have completed the form and provided the notice with, if you're on Zoom, with the complete Zoom name, first and last name, and it must be the same as what's showing up on the screen. We're holding this meeting as a hybrid so people can access the meeting remotely, as I mentioned, via Zoom or in person at the CAP, Callaway School of the Arts. This is our second hybrid meeting, but the 9th time we've held an electronic board meeting via Zoom. And we learn something every time, and we thank you for your continued support and patience as we continue to encounter new issues and work through details. We clearly learn something new every time, and we get better each time. As a courtesy to others and to prevent unnecessary disruption, all devices will be muted unless and until you are recognized to speak. As mentioned, if you signed up to speak, your Zoom name must be what you put into the public comment form you completed in order to be able to be recognized to speak or are called to speak on in person. School board members, there's 5 of us here in the room, 2 are remote. The 2 that are remote will remain muted because, and they will text me if they want to speak, because when the remote is on with the in-person, there's feedback in the room and we're trying to minimize that feedback. So Dr. Bohm and Mr. Matthews are remote, and if they want to speak, they will let me know via text and I will make sure there's time for them to speak. We will have a roll call vote for each item to be voted on, and during that time, there may be feedback in the room, so please bear with us. Each board member should identify themselves by name prior to speaking, as this meeting is being recorded. And with that, we begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, so if everyone can stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
silence.
There's a moment of silence. We go to a moment of silence and my screen is frozen, so bear with me. There it is. Okay, I've got it. My apologies. Things are freezing up here, so I apologize. So right now we have a moment of silence for Jamari Hoxter from the First State School. Jamari Hoxter passed away October 30, 2020. Jamari was 16 years old and has been a student at First State School for 4 years. Despite Jamari's medical challenges, he lived every day to the fullest extent possible. Those that had the privilege of knowing him will remember his bright, refreshing personality and the ability to make those around him smile and laugh. He was known for always helping our youngest students with anything that they needed. Jamari was also known as the mayor of the First State School and was a friend to everyone. He loved to be around others and has touched the heart of many staff members and students. Jamari will be deeply missed by all. So let's have a moment of silence. Thank you. And now we move on to the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as presented?
So moved. This is Ashley Sabo, so moved.
So Jose texted me, and I don't really understand it, but he wants to.
This is Jose Matthews. Can I second the
Can
motion?
you unmute Mr. Matthews for a second? And Miss Sabo moved.
This is Jose Matthews. Can I second?
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you. Okay, all in favor, we'll have to have a roll call vote, please, Maria and Tony.
Dr. Bohm,
Yes.
Mr. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. Matthews,
Yes.
Dr. Newton,
Yes.
Ms. Sabo,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson.
Yes,
Unanimous vote, motion carries.
thank you. Okay, and now we move on to student, staff, community relations, and public recognitions and public comment. I believe we only have public comment tonight, not the others. So again, thank you for coming out tonight to attend our meeting and share your thoughts. Under Board Policy 2006, the board encourages the staff and community to share concerns concerning school issues and educational programs. Sharing can be done verbally, in writing, and by speaking at the meeting. So we're operating under Policy 2006. The board shall provide a time period of up to 30 minutes for public comments, which can be extended at the board's discretion. Speakers are requested to give a written copy of their remarks to the superintendent, and speakers are limited to a 3-minute time period. The timer will appear on the screen. You will see the 3 minutes, and when it's up, your mic will be muted. So thank you very much again for coming out to speak. And our first speaker is it Miss Omika Mumford? Welcome. Miss Mumford?
Can you hear me?
Now we can, yes.
Okay,
Welcome.
thank you. So I guess I get started. My 3 minutes start now?
Yeah, so Tony, are you going to have the timer going, or Maria? It's going, yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so I've taught kindergarten for over 20 years, and I've never been a fan of the class size waiver, mainly because when kindergartners start, they haven't mastered the concept of spatial awareness. And years ago, we had like 31 before we could earn a unit. You know, children got stepped on, not on purpose, but, you know, it happened. With that said, I don't think that we should approve the waiver. The CDC recommends 6 feet apart, and the governor mandated 3 feet apart. And 6 feet is if children are eating in the classroom. Well, we're currently 3 feet apart, and our children are eating breakfast in the classroom and lunch every other week. And if I buy them snacks, they're having that as well. And it's wrong. And the thought of compounding that error is appalling to me. I'm already at capacity with 3 feet apart. I have 20 students on my roster. They may fall off, but they may not, which would mean, if I'm understanding everything correctly, that we will be forced to use that class waiver and more than 22 will be in our classrooms. We are transient. We have a transient population, and that's compounded by the McKinney-Vento, which means our classes decrease at times, but they also increase all school year long. So that also doesn't include the choice. And so they can come in and classes can grow until choice shuts down. The students that have social emotional issues and behavioral issues that require more than just the teacher's counseling, but they require a psychologist or some counselor that has a degree in this, exacerbates the already hazardous situation. If they're running around refusing to put on their mask, we're all at risk. If we end up remote again and our classes increase, then teachers are expected to handle the teaching, the assessing, and the data collection for 30 or more students, often which are going to haphazardly pop in and out. That's been the experience thus far. Everybody's under the pressure of the pandemic.
Thank you, Ms. Mumford. Next is Miss Angela Johnson. Welcome, Miss Johnson. Hello, Miss Johnson.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, so my name is Angela Johnson, and I'm a school counselor at one of the Red Clay schools, and I wanted to talk about a few things tonight, one of which I agree with the person that went before me for the waiver. Right now, it's for remote classrooms, but being as though we're in a time where now if this waiver is approved, it's not limited to remote, I think that it's a bad idea. Secondly, I wanted to talk about some other things that don't have to do with the count. One is transparency. As a Red Clay employee, I am disappointed that we have not been transparent about what is going on in our district with employees or parents. I had to find out about cases and schools being closed on Facebook and through the grapevine, not because I was contacted from you guys as our employer, which is really frustrating. I have a child in the Colonial School District, and an email went out to everyone letting them know what was going on and what was being done, and they shut down to keep their staff and students safe. Having been in the building the last 3 weeks, I don't feel like the situation is safe. I don't feel like we have a handle on it. We've been talking about things being a balancing act, and right now, I feel like the staff is taking the brunt of it and having to balance to appease people regardless of the numbers and what is it's not safe right now. I also feel like because we're not being transparent about what is going on with cases in our district, it makes me wonder about what other things are not being disclosed to the staff and what else we're not being transparent about. If you can trust us to be with students and expect us to uphold the highest standards of the CDC, then I feel like you should be able to let your employees know what's going on so that they're not being asked by strangers and maybe continuing the rumor mill that we talk about. I feel like as staff, we love our students first. We're talking about staff members that go out of their way. They buy things for students. They stay extra for students. No one works bell to bell for our students. And I feel like educators are being ignored. I feel like the staff is being looked over when we talk about these plans and safety. I found out today that Colonial was closed until January, and we're still, I feel like, sitting ducks with the numbers rising and things going on, and no one is saying anything. An email hasn't gone out to say what the plan is at all. So it's very frustrating, extremely frustrating to work somewhere and feel undervalued because no one is saying anything about what's going on. I've sat, I've kept quiet, I've listened, and out of maybe fear for retaliation or repercussion, but I can't sit anymore because I don't feel safe. And I don't feel safe for myself, my colleagues, or my students. And my students come first. I don't feel safe going home after being in buildings where everything is just, we're gonna follow the guidelines, but no one's given direction really on how to do.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. The next is Miss McKenna Riley. Welcome, Miss Riley.
Good evening, everyone. Am I able to be heard?
Yes, welcome.
Hello. I'd like to bring forth the issue of students' mental health. I personally do not have a point of view for teachers and their struggles, but I do know as a student myself that we are all trying our best and we're all very stressed about the current situation going on with our nation. I would like to bring up that students I know at my district have not been able to see what remote learning and hybrid learning is like before this pandemic. And the sudden workload is a struggle for all of us. I'm glad that we're following guidelines and we're all trying our best to stay safe and healthy in this environment. But I don't know how much further we can go with how numbers are increasing and how it is getting more dangerous while the days go on and temperatures are dropping. I also want to bring up the asynchronous learning days, and I do not believe that they're the best for students. I think students need structure throughout their day, and I think they need guidelines for their schedule throughout the learning period. That is all.
Thank you, Ms. Riley. Next is Miss Linda Reagan. Welcome, Miss Reagan.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. I'm speaking today to address two issues that are up for decision this evening. Changing the board meetings to all in person with no virtual option, and the class size waiver. First, I ask that you continue allowing virtual public participation and public comment through a virtual platform. Though the decision to include a virtual option for the board meetings was only considered due to the pandemic, it has shown itself to be a valuable tool in increasing participation, which should always be a goal of the board and the district. Removing this access would be a major step backward and prove to be very detrimental to community involvement and voice. The board and district should always be looking for ways to increase participation, not silencing voices. There are many and varied reasons for the community's use of the virtual feature. These often include illness, infirmity, and family or work obligations. Keeping an in-person participation as well as virtual will allow for increased community participation, which, again, should always be a goal of the district. With regards to the class size waiver consideration, while this seems to be a traditional allowance of larger class sizes nearly every year in Red Clay, during a pandemic particularly, asking for permission to put more children in classes is unsafe, and allowing for more students in the virtual setting is unproductive and unreasonable for the teachers and the students. Bearing this in mind, I ask that you decline the class size waiver request. I know that you will take these concerns into consideration this evening as you decide how to vote on these matters. Always put the safety of our children and teachers first. Always look for ways to increase community participation and a way for doing anything that would diminish what has already shown to be greater interest and involvement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Reagan. Ms. Solomon and Mr. Wagner are not here, so the next is Mr. Stephen Fackenthal. Welcome, Mr. Fackenthal.
Good evening, board. I hope you're well. Thanks for giving me time to speak tonight. My name is Stephen Fackenthal, music teacher at Ritchie Elementary and vice president of the Red Clay Education Association. I'm here to speak tonight regarding the proposed resolution on the role of the board in the plan for hybrid reopening. On behalf of our CEA leadership team, we believe extraordinary times call for extraordinary measures. That includes more transparency and oversight. That includes truly calling on all stakeholders to help craft decisions and allowing those that have oversight to use it to their greatest possible ability. Pardon me. In DSEA's statement issued Monday, it was stated, because of this current increase in new cases, our members are actively engaging with their local administrations. They are giving feedback from inside of our schools. They are asking for support and they are asking to be kept safe. And in many districts, they do not feel they are being heard. To address those concerns, we have the following suggestions. More guidance as to when schools should be closed by the district. There is no consistency when it comes to what is needed to close a school. More guidance when it comes to increasing the number of students in a building. Public and district communication regarding re-entry plans. No school board should be relinquishing the right to approve or a re-entry plan or relinquish the right for the public to weigh in on their plan. Distribution of PPE. Our members are not receiving the PPE that they need to do their jobs. Many educators have to buy for themselves, and the students have their own pockets and districts, and they've not supplied or not have ample supply. Now is the time for strong and responsible leadership. Educators deserve better. We want to be heard along with all community stakeholders. This is not a time to limit voices. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Fackenthal. And lastly is Miss Genevieve Van Catledge. Welcome, Miss Van Catledge.
Thank you very much for having me. I am speaking tonight regarding the resolution that has been put forth by the board regarding its oversight and voting responsibilities. It is entirely inappropriate and was very dismissive in tone. Never mind the fact that in the final paragraph, there's a grammatical error. I believe you meant executive and not execution. It risks a lack of transparency, a marked decrease in dissemination of information in a clear format, as in the presentations, which are frequently proffered. It lacks, and there will be a loss of accountability both before and after the fact regarding things, a loss of opportunity or elimination of the student, parent, teacher, and staff voice, disenfranchising the very constituents who elected you to the positions you currently hold. No board should be relinquishing their ability to vote on district plans concerning hybrid reopening, remote learning. I realize that the pandemic has led to an increased time commitment. It has done so for all of us. However, it is quite short-sighted and sets a very dangerous precedent for you to shirk these responsibilities. I know the time increase in meetings, both in number and length, has been a challenge. We live in extraordinary times, and we are dealing with extraordinary challenges, which require extraordinary time, effort, and dedication to contribute our best for the good of the whole community. Teachers have stepped up to the plate, making sacrifices to meet challenges that are continuing to rise up before us. I sympathize with the time challenge. I myself have worked until at least 7 or 8 every night. I am teleworking. I have not left the chair that I am sitting in from meetings and work yet today, other than for restroom and food breaks. It is easy to feel overwhelmed by today's challenges, but you cannot abdicate your responsibilities as elected board members. Do your duty. We all need to deal wisely with today's challenges that when the current crisis has been resolved, we all may have healthily functioning school boards, administrative structures, and educational systems of which we can be proud. It is short-sighted because while I trust Dr. Green, he will not always be in this position, and the precedent set by you yielding your job and your requirement to vote on policy sets an awful precedent. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Van Catledge. And that concludes public comment. Thank you very much. We move on to approval of the minutes. So can I have a motion to approve the minutes from the October 15, 2020 special board meeting?
So moved.
Ms. Sabo moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Wilson seconds. Any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Stevens, can we take a vote, please?
Dr. Bohm,
Yes.
Mr. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. Matthews,
Yes.
Dr. Newton,
Yes.
Ms. Sabo,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
unanimous vote, motion carries.
Okay, so we move on to and I'll probably combine these two, okay? May I have a motion to approve the minutes from the October 21, 2020 exec session and the October 21, 2020 regular session?
So move.
Mr. Wilson moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Sabo seconds. Is there any discussion? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Stevens, can we take a vote, please?
Dr. Bone,
Yes.
Mr. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. Matthews,
Yes.
Dr. Newton? Yes. Ms. Sabo,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson,
Yes.
unanimous vote, motion carries.
Okay, now we move on to the action items. And our action item tonight, there's one, so Mr. Green.
In one moment, I know Dr. Bohm had a request for numbers. And so before we present the action item before the board to actually vote on class size waiver, Dr. Grundy is coming back up to respond to Dr. Bohm's request.
So I'm not sure if this is exactly what was asked for, but this is what I have now. And if there requires additional follow-up, I'll certainly do that. But overall, in our K-3, we have 2,942 students attending on campus. So it's about 61%. We have 1,723 students who are online. So that's about 36%. We have about 57 students who are enrolled in accelerated ed, which is about 1%. And I am missing data on a handful of students from the report that I was able to generate. So if there's other specific numbers that are required, I can certainly follow up tomorrow.
And Dr. Grundy, do we have the total number of students in the 26 classrooms that we're requesting a waiver of?
The total number of students in the classrooms that we're requesting the waiver. I don't.
Okay.
I can figure that out, but I don't have that total right now.
And Dr. Bohm, I don't know if that was the nature of your question or if
Can I be unmuted?
provided to you suffice.
Can I be unmuted?
Dr.
Can
Bond,
you hear me?
okay, is she unmuted?
Am I unmuted?
Dr. Bone?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Amy, can you repeat those numbers, please? I'm trying to write them down.
Overall, in kindergarten through third grade, in person, we have 2,942 students, accounting for about 61% of our kindergarten through third graders. Attending online, 1,723. So it's about 36% of our kindergarten through third grade students. 57 enrolled in accelerated ed, which is about 1%. And we do have a handful of students in the report that I was able to generate in this short notice that are unaccounted for. That's 38 students that are not accounted for of the 4,760 students in kindergarten through third grade in our district at this time.
And then can you tell me what percentage of your staff is teaching remotely? So if it's 36% of students that are learning remotely,
Each school, there are 4 teachers teaching remotely as a generality.
And Dr. Bohm, we would be giving you approximates with that because again, there are teachers who are telework, there are those who are, and so that might be a hard exact number to give you on a moment's notice like this.
so 4 teachers are teaching 36% of our remote population. Is that correct?
No, that's not correct.
So then
there are about 4 teachers teaching remote, and that's my point is.
On an average, but there are some schools where there's 8. I apologize.
And again, we don't want to give approximates right now as folks might draw conclusions based on numbers that we can't give you definitive numbers when we're talking about staffing on a moment's notice.
So I couldn't hear what Amy said. Amy, you said something while Superintendent Green was speaking.
No, I apologize, I interrupted him. There are, on average, there's a minimum of 4 in each school, but in some schools that number is higher because they have 2 sections. So I don't have the grand total, But at a minimum, there's one per grade in every school, and then some schools have two in their grade.
Okay. Thank you for those numbers. And you may not be able to get this to me right now, but what I was interested in is, because the district is asking for a class size waiver, I would like to know cumulatively how many additional students we have as a grand sum. So if I could get that information in the next day or two, that would be great. So how many additional students are we talking about for all of those classes?
So Amy, based on the slide where it has the classrooms that are asking for a waiver, estimated math, it's 655 students total that are in classes that need a waiver based on that screen. And I think that's what you're looking for, Dr. Bohm, how many kids are in the classrooms?
I didn't hear anything you said, Ashley. I think I always have trouble hearing you.
Why don't you, can you repeat that, Ashley? And
So are
we'll
you
see.
looking for the number of students in classrooms that are gonna have waivers requested? How many?
That was one thing I was looking on. I can't see any of the slides when they're on the screen.
Ashley. No, pension. Lift it up.
Are you looking for the number of students that are impacted by the waiver in the classrooms?
That was part of what I was looking for, yes.
Okay, so based on the slide and the numbers that Amy gave, it's about 655 students.
Thank you. And I can't see those slides when I'm on the Zoom. But if you could get me those other numbers, that would be terrific too. I'd like to know about how many educators are responsible for the 36% of remote learners, and what number of teachers are responsible for the approximately 61% of in-person students.
We'll make sure Dr. Gurney follows up with you tomorrow, Dr. Bohm.
Yep.
Thank you.
Can do that.
Okay, so I believe we have an action item.
One moment.
Yes.
It is recommended that the Red Clay School Board of Education approve the class size waiver request as submitted.
Is there a motion?
So moved, Dr. Newton.
Dr. Newton moves. Is there a second?
Second by Ashley Sabo.
Thank you. And now discussion. Any discussion?
Yes, I have a few remarks.
I think it's important that we acknowledge what both Dr. Grundy and Mr. Green said, that the class size waiver does not affect any in-class portions of our education right now. And again, due to the class size waiver is always something that's very difficult to support, but due to the financial aspect coming from local funds, that's a major hit on our budget. But again, knowing that it's not affecting our in-class classes should come as some relief, because we have other supports for the synchronous learning where you can, break that up a little bit more. So thank you for that clarification, both from Dr. Green and, Mr. Green and Dr. Grundy.
Maria and Tony, Dr. Bohm wants to be unmuted because she has a comment and a question. Or a question and remarks.
You're unmuted, Dr. Bohm.
Thank you. So I'd just like to say that we all know that living in a pandemic is tough. And many of us know that teaching in a pandemic is also tough. Our Zoomers are stressed, our students who are in AE are stressed, and our roomers are stressed. Educators, families, and staff are also stressed. And we know this because we know it from the public comments that were made tonight from educators in our district. We know it from the hundreds of emails that we've received and the texts and the phone calls. I know it when I go into schools and I talk to people, and I talk to people in the grocery stores when I see them. I also have people who have showed up on my doorstep about this class size waiver. So asking for a class size waiver and literally increasing class sizes right now makes an already difficult situation even harder for those teaching, and it also makes it harder for those who are trying to learn. We all know that small class sizes have many benefits. I have always voted against class size waivers, and for the 7 years I've been on the board, we've been asked to provide class size waivers on numerous occasions, more occasions than not. And I've talked about all of the benefits of small class sizes, and being in the educational field, we should know them. So I'm not going to list all of them, but I'll say a few of them. So there's stronger one-on-one instruction when we have smaller class sizes. There's definitely a reduction in student discipline referrals, which I've talked about a number of times. There's early identification of students with learning disabilities when we have small class sizes. There's a reduction in the racial achievement gap when we have small sizes, and I can go on and on. So what I just want to say is that class size waivers are not a solution for anything, not one single thing. Class size waivers don't fix anything. What they do are they merely compound an already overtaxed system, and they exhaust our educators even more. And in the midst of a pandemic, when everyone is struggling, everyone, our students are struggling. Many of them are facing evictions. They're out on the street, they're homeless. Families are losing their jobs, middle class families who have always had strong economic stability in their households. People are fighting more. Mental health is an issue across the nation. We know that. I've talked about this on numerous occasions. Introducing larger class sizes makes teaching and learning more difficult, and I will always be opposed to granting a waiver to increase a class size, because as an educator, I know that's not a solution to any problem that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a comment. So I totally understand the importance of small class sizes, and I know this board does as well. But I do believe that what we have to be charged with doing is looking out for all of Red Clay. We are in the midst of a pandemic, which, as Dr. Bowe mentioned, is very, very stressful for absolutely every single person. Even for someone like me, it is exceedingly stressful. We are using, as Dr. Grundy and Mr. Green mentioned, every single unit that is available. This is all in the remote classrooms, and actually in the way in which the remote classrooms operate. I think the biggest issue is probably how the teacher does the grading, because I'm not sure everybody's even on in gallery view. So I think in the remote classroom, the class size is really somewhat kind of meaningless. As a long-term member of our Community Financial Review Committee, I believe that $2.6 million of local money is unsustainable, and it is the fastest way to lead to a financial crisis for Red Clay. And as a result, I support the class size waiver. And I'm sorry that we need to be in this situation, but I do believe we need to look out for all of Red Clay. Thank you. Any more comments? Okay, hearing none, Maria, we're ready for a vote, please.
Dr. Bowe,
No, no, no.
Mr. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. Matthews? Mr. Matthews?
No,
I'm getting a text from him.
no. Can you guys hear?
I can
Okay.
hear it now. Dr. Newton? Yes. Yes. Ms. Sabo?
Yes.
Mr. Wilson?
Yes.
Ms. Thompson?
Yes.
So 5 yes, 2 no, motion carries.
Okay, so now we move on to presentations, and we've already had the class size presentation. So Dr. Broomall, we get to hear board policies, something that we haven't heard for a while. We're all excited.
Good evening. So we have not had board policy in a good while in Red Clay, but I'm excited to bring it to you this evening. The board policy, as you know, are the written guidelines that establish the legal foundation for all board activity. They conform with local and national mandates and provide an organizing structure for district operations and administration. We have a board policy review committee. The committee is established to help facilitate the board policy review process by reviewing and discussing feedback on new and revised board policies. It is comprised of members of the Red Clay community, RCA, and the Red Clay board. The objective for this evening is to provide an overview of the policy development process, a summary of policies under review, policy 9005, a student representative to the school board, which is a brand new policy, and policy 4005.1, sexual harassment and grievance process, which also is a new policy for Red Clay. Our next steps will be to go over the timeline for developing policies under review, ways to participate in the policy review process. The policy development process. The way it works is whether a law is changed, a regulation is changed, or there's a issue from the board or the community that feels like a policy needs to address. The policy is researched and identified policy topics, create sample policies, and analyze any relevant documents. With input from subject matter experts and agreement on draft policy content from appropriate departments, we assemble a draft policy. That draft policy then becomes before the board for a first reading and then a second reading at the subsequent board meeting. The first policy is student representative to the school board. As you may recall, the board asked us to come together and develop a draft to have a process for students to have a meaningful input into board operations. The policy statement is the school board values the voices of students and wishes to both engage student involvement and promote the communications link between the school board and the students of the district by authorizing a student representative to serve on the school board as a non-voting member. The school board believes that the views, insights, and suggestions of a student representative on the board can be advantageous to the school board in its decision-making role regarding educational policies and programs. The purpose of this policy is to define the selection, rights, and responsibilities of the student representative on the board. Some of the highlights of the policy is that the student government president or senior class president from all 7 high schools will serve on the Red Clay student representation to the board council, referred to as a student council moving forward. If the student government president or senior class president is not able to participate on the council, they will work with their school principal and director of secondary schools to develop a process to designate a member to the student council. The 7-member council will rotate monthly and designate a representative to attend regularly scheduled board meetings while school is in session. Each school council member will serve as the representative to the board at least once per school year. The student council may also appoint a student representative to serve on any standing board committee. The student council representatives must meet or exceed the established academic standards required for participation in interscholastic athletic programs. The student council members will serve a 1-year term from July 1 to June 30th. They will meet at least monthly, rotating schools with an initial meeting to select representation by the June Board of Education meeting. And this committee will be guided by the director of secondary schools. The second policy is 4005.1, sexual harassment and grievance. Any person may report sex discrimination, including sexual harassment, at any time, including during non-business hours. This policy was necessitated by changing guidance that required us to bring forth the policy to the Board of Education. And this policy basically is reflective of the current law. Our next steps will be posting the policies online tomorrow morning. We will have a board policy review committee at 5 o'clock on December 2nd in the district office. We'll come back to the board on December 16th for a second reading. And on December 17th, approved policies will be published online and in the board policy manual. Community can provide feedback by emailing us at boardpolicy@redclay.k12.de.us. Community is welcome to attend our next board policy review committee meeting. And you can also submit feedback during designated public comment at the next regularly scheduled board meeting. I don't know if there are any questions.
This is Dr. Bohm.
Any questions?
Can you hear me, Dr. Broomall?
Yeah, it looks really good. Thank you, Dr. Broomhall. Appreciate it. Okay, so now, Mr. Green, we want to hear the superintendent's report, please.
Thank you, Madam President, members, staff, faculty.
Oh, excuse me for a second. Adriana says, unmute me, please.
Dr. Brumall, you might need to
Come back. Can you unmute Dr. Bohm? Dr. Bohm?
Yes, is Dr. Broomall there?
Yes.
Dr. Broomall?
Yes.
I just want to say thank you very much. I think they're really important policies, and I appreciate the work that you and the committee did on them. And I'm just really happy. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, so now it's superintendent, isn't it? Maybe Jason said it, I might have gotten that wrong. Is consent next? Unfortunately, my internet keeps going in and out. I don't know why. So my apologies here. Yeah. Oh, I jumped over consent. We'll do that next. Okay, Jason, thank you very much. All right, Mr. Green.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the board, faculty, staff, those who are attending online. I just wanted to take a brief opportunity to go through my superintendent's report. There is a lot going on, and that's an understatement as it relates to our transition on November 2nd to a full virtual hybrid learning opportunity for all of our K-12 students across the district. However, we started on October 19th with our, again, early years program, preschool programming, Meadowwood, and if we can go back actually to the cover page of my report. I want to thank Ms. Barbaro, the library media specialist over at Highlands, for this wonderful cover picture. The kindergarten classes over at Highlands are reading I Know an Old Lady Who Swallowed a Pie This Week in the Library. And so that picture is actually the artwork that the students made as a result of the literacy programming and reading that they're participating in. And so last week was National School Psychologist Week. And so we joined schools around the state and across the nation celebrating our school psychologists and recognizing them for all of their tireless efforts, not just supporting students around testing, behavioral supports and programming, but helping create schools where students, families, and staff members thrive. So thank you to all of the school psychologists across Red Clay, throughout the state of Delaware, and across our nation for all the wonderful work you do. No more fitting than the present time that we're living in now, where their resources and supports are definitely needed and relied upon. Also want to give a shout out to all of our music and band and instrument teachers across the district. We opened up signups and roughly about 700 students signed up for new instrumental programs in grades 4 to 8 last week. Thank you to our music educators for putting together a fun and informative video to explain the opportunity to families. Thank you to the very talented Avery, Karina, Akira, Vivian, Brooke, and Matthew, who shared videos about their passion for band and strings. And I have to say, my house is my daughter's playing the clarinet, and so it's a no squeak zone. I learned that from Mr. Atkins, and so Jade and I can share that moment as she learns, and actually she was on lessons today between the time that I stopped home and came here for the board meeting. So thank you to our dedicated music educators for all of their hard works and efforts to be able to support students virtually. And I think both in person and virtually. They've had outdoor sessions where they socially distance in a number of instances and occasions. And based on this opportunity, students will have a school-based instructor and specific instrument instruction as well. And our teachers are able to leverage Zoom for instrument instruction, as was Jasmine participating in that. And they can hold small groups sessions across the district on a specific instrument. So they're using that Zoom as an opportunity to bring other students together across the district. So, now all flute players can play together as a class. So this is a wonderful opportunity, again, seeing over 700 students sign up for instrumental programs across the district. Thank you to Ms. Bewley, Kelly Shahan, our Transportation Director, and Dr. Ammon for putting on our open house choice night. And so we have begun to host choice nights throughout Red Clay. You can watch recent webinars and apply online at redclayschools.com. So we are in the choice window. So please take that moment for those who are interested in choice, again, to go to redclayschools.com to find out more about the choice process. Last Friday, we had the opportunity as a district to host the Newcastle County Combined Boards member meeting on November 6th. The guest speaker and presenter was Secretary of Education, Dr. Susan Bunting, who provided an update on reopening plans that are taking place across the various schools throughout the state. We were able to share insights as a Newcastle County consortium, in essence, in terms of our success points and struggles as it relates to reopening, where we find ourselves present day. And then also, Dr. Bunting talked about the ACLU lawsuit settlement with the state and gave some insight as to the mechanisms that are taking place around the lawsuit, which is providing additional funding for K-3 basic special education, English learners, and low-income students. And so, others, community advocates such as J Street and others led that effort in working to bring forth that suit, and the state has settled, and so they're continuing to work through that process. And so again, on November 2nd, we were able to welcome over 8,500 students and approximately 1,000 staff members transition back to school buildings to Red Clay for in-person learning. I had the opportunity to go to each school and engage with each of our building leaders to really look at, some of the things that we were anxious about in terms of welcoming students and staff members back. And it goes without saying that we are continuing to face our challenges, as we have seen an uptick in the number of cases within our communities. Again, I've always said that our schools are microcosms of the communities that we serve. And while we have social distancing, while we have the necessary requirements in school, we're dealing with the implications, I think, what we all see and playing out outside of our schools. And so with that being said, again, I want to thank all of our building level administrators, custodial staff, school nutrition workers, bus drivers, admin support staff, clerical staff, everyone who has done a wonderful job in bringing opportunities back to families who selected in-person learning, being able to see the smiles actually glow beyond the mask, from behind the mask, seeing the interaction between staff members and students, seeing students have the ability to interact with their peers, seeing the little ones wear their face masks, seeing those who had issues or perceived issues in terms of students with disabilities who they had concerns with actually wearing masks. Again, but it goes without saying that we still are in the midst of a pandemic, and at any moment's notice, these plans and things can shift as we see, cases, rising in our various communities. So since welcoming, students back on our campus, we've experienced approximately 31 notifications of confirmed student and or staff cases during phase 2. Those numbers, again, continue to increase. But we have and are fortunate to say as of today that no reported cases originated from or spread in our schools. While there is a quote in here from Dr. Carol Rattay from the presentation yesterday indicating that transmission of COVID-19 has been rare in Delaware schools because students, educators, and staff are following the basic health guidelines and doing their parts to keep children in classrooms, and exposure is primarily occurring in social settings outside of school. And while they might be occurring outside of school, again, we're still dealing with the implications and the stress and the uncertainty inside of school when we're making those notifications. And per the 25th Amendment of the governor's modification, those notices go out per school. So when we have these incidents where we have to notify, those notices are school-based and site-based, not district-wide notices. We have noticed individual schools as it relates to closures, which aren't comfortable. When you find out, again, based on the broad quarantine measures that are being implemented by the state, based on those who they deem to be at risk, it's hampered our ability in many instances, such as North Star, such as Richardson Park for a week, and now going into this remote week for AI Middle School, which wasn't a risk of spread, but more importantly, quarantining of critical staff, that I don't think any district across the state had really anticipated as we phased into in-person learning. And so when you see an example such as Laurel School District, who recently made the decision to close because one case quarantined 48 people. And so those are some of the mechanisms and things that we're addressing and dealing with as we work inside to keep folks safe. But we are dealing with those situations that come, and they do come at a moment's notice. I do want to thank our school nurses. Our nurses, who are the only healthcare workers in a non-healthcare setting, have truly stepped up, and their hours are long on a given day. They're working weekends as they've become the default contact tracers. And in most instances, they're looking at space, they're looking at confinement as they do their investigations to do the contact tracing. And then in essence, what they're doing is working with the Department of Health, who in a perfect world would be notifying us of these cases, but in many instances, we're notifying the Department of Health, which starts that contact tracing. And just for the board to be aware, we started the second we get notice. In a lot of instances, the Department of Health does not begin their process until they have a confirmed lab case, which could be a number of days in between the time that someone actually receives a notification of a positive test from the time that the Department of Health. And so our nurses have truly stood in the gap. I want to thank Mandy Pennington, our lead nurse, who is helping guide a lot of that work. But again, to each and every nurse in the Red Clay Consolidated School District, thank you for what you're doing, because COVID and what we're dealing with, again, to be transparent, isn't a Monday through Friday school hour situation. And so folks are working long hours through the weekends to address the situation. So again, I want to thank our school nurses and our staff within our buildings for doing everything they can to keep our students safe in this current environment, and more importantly, giving us the opportunity to give some sense of a new normal as we welcome a large portion of our student population back to in-person learning. Just some photos, again, of spaces where we had concerns prior to opening. But as you can see, and this is actually a picture at Cook, and we had a lot of discussion in previous board meetings about, the large numbers of folks who selected in-person learning at Cook. And I want to thank Principal Ennis and her staff over at Cook for all of their hard work and effort, and a lot of the feedback that I received from both Cook families and having the opportunity to walk the halls. They've been doing a good job as we transition to in-person learning. Roughly about 44% of our students are enrolled in Red Clay Online for the second marking period. Most of them are on a Zoom platform. And again, we do have some families who have chosen to continue with the self-paced learning through accelerated education. And so we've listened and heard our community. In most instances, plans are rolled out and you kind of get what you're given. We, in essence, really listened and honored those who felt that AE, accelerated education, was adequate for their families to continue with that option. And we've had families who have continued on that platform. But again, the majority through phase 2 are on a Zoom platform. Before you right now, you see the gating criteria. And this is the latest as it's being publicized on the My Healthies Community platform, which gives updates on the COVID cases throughout our state, but more importantly, where the state it sits currently with the gating criteria. Delaware Public Health and the Governor's Office established 3 clear criteria. One of those shifted midway through. Previous, it was the percent persons positive. That number 1 has shifted now to the percent test positive, which factors in the number of negative tests and not just the people or individuals who are testing positive, which gives a very different kind of number and percentage of the spread that's happening within our communities. Average daily hospitalizations, and then third indicator is the new case rates, which is currently the only category that the state is reporting to be significant and in the red category. In order for the state to make a decision on transitioning to another phase or determining whether or not a school or schools should close, 2 of the 3 categories would have to be in the red. But for us, we're monitoring, those cases within Red Clay and ultimately determining operationally and from a safety and health standpoint, what's adequate for us to continue. And I will tell you, schools such as AI Middle School, we had to make the decision because operationally, based on 3 cases in that building that we were made aware of, quarantine critical staff. In certain buildings such as North Star, 1 case quarantine critical staff. And so when we look at things operationally, it really presents some challenges, not necessarily around the spread, but our ability to run and operate effectively when we have mass quarantining happening. And I think a lot of our neighboring school districts that have recently made decisions made them not only on positive cases within their district, but their ability to continue operationally. Again, when you look at a school district such as Laurel, when they had 1 student case that quarantined 48 individuals. Just for those who, again, in accordance to where the state is with regards to school closure, they have updated state of Delaware COVID restrictions. So starting Monday, November 30th, they're putting a limitation on indoor gatherings in homes. They've capped that number at no more than 10 people. Indoor gatherings outside of homes must be limited to 30% of the venue's stated fire capacity, up to a cap of 50 people. This includes all events such as weddings, funerals, services in houses of worship, performances, political gatherings, and events in public spaces, including fire halls. Outdoor public gatherings are limited to 50 people. Up to 250 people may be allowed with an approved plan from the Delaware Department of Health. Restaurants must operate at no more than 30% fire capacity indoors with allowances for additional outdoor seating. And then the governor's order will also prohibit Delaware youth sports organizations and teams and venues from hosting or participating in tournaments with out-of-state teams effective 8 a.m. on Tuesday, December the 1st. The order includes provisions prohibiting Delaware teams from traveling across state lines for tournaments as well. We're still waiting on clearance or guidance on terms of what does that mean for DIAA winter sports as well. So we're waiting on that information from the state. But again, we're monitoring and not necessarily waiting for the state as to what is that threshold for us to go back to a position where we have to make that call to go back to a full remote learning platform. And at this present time, we're not there yet. We're working to get through this week. So we have 2 days left, Thursday and Friday. And again, we are working with our schools, school nurses, and others, the Department of Health, to ensure that what we're doing by Red Clay is not only adhering to the guidelines, but making sure we support those who are being impacted by whether that would be quarantines or notices that are taking place in our schools. This slide just references our process maps to help us navigate the realities of working and learning in the COVID pandemic environment with consistency and transparency. So it discusses whether that would be from a student and or staff. If someone feels or develops symptoms or feel like they're symptomatic at home, what should they do? First and foremost, please stay home. If you are symptomatic or feel like you're symptomatic, whether that's a student and or staff. If you become symptomatic at work, if you receive a positive test, if you live with someone who is positive, and then more importantly, if you experience prolonged exposure in terms of what that process will be. So those contact or process maps are the processes by which we're following. We have a series of videos that you can watch on our YouTube. Watch our Return to Learning playlist on YouTube. There's 7 short videos created to help families make a safe and healthy return to in-person learning. I know a large portion of our community had the opportunity to see those videos, but they're still available to those who, again, want them on our YouTube channel. Just again, checking for symptoms each day, make sure, and this is just a matter of habit at this point, the COVID screening for families and or staff, the self-screening process each morning, additional health tips, 10 tips for returning to school are available. And you can go to the next slide. Next one. We obviously know that the holiday season, Thanksgiving is by far my favorite holiday and one that will be disrupted this year and not celebrated in a traditional fashion. And we're just advocating and raising caution to all of our stakeholders, families, and community to try your best to celebrate the holiday if you do celebrate the holiday with caution. That being said, we are serving up our special menu for students both this week and next week. And so on the 17th, at our high schools and secondary schools, they had the opportunities for those students who were A cohort to participate in turkey roast lunch. And then on the 19th, which will be tomorrow, will be for cohort B. And though for those students who are remote, will have an opportunity to have access to a turkey dinner on November 23rd at one of 8 curbside pickup locations throughout Red Clay. We also want to talk about our community partners and partnerships. One being Parkview Church has been working throughout this pandemic to support many Red Clay families and continue to do so. Yesterday, they so graciously gave 75 boxes and turkeys to families at Baltz Elementary. They'll be at Heritage Elementary tomorrow, providing access to, again, 75 boxes of hope is what they call them, and also turkeys, 12 to 14 pound turkeys for 75 families at Heritage Elementary. So thank you to Pastor Chris and the members at Parkview for their ongoing support of Red Clay and Red Clay families. Community giving continues to take place in Red Clay. We want to thank you to our long-term partner who we recognized last year at the Red Clay Foundation Gala, Harvey and Hannah, and the Delaware Kids Fund for their many efforts and ongoing support. Each student at Highlands Elementary will receive a winter coat. This was initially a socially distanced process and program, but unfortunately, there has been a change of plans. However, each student will receive a coat as a result of this partnership with Delaware Kids Fund. So again, thank you to Harvey, Hannah and Associates for their ongoing support and resource for Red Clay families. And as I mentioned, the holidays, while we will be out next week, make sure that you make it as safe as you possibly can. Again, wearing a mask, staying and socially distancing, making sure we wash our hands for at least 20 seconds. Just things that I think sometimes we may routinely take for granted. If you are planning to get together, take extra precaution. If you plan to attend or host a gathering, stay home if you can. If you travel, do so responsibly and understanding that most states, especially in our neighboring states, have travel restrictions. So please make sure you plan accordingly. And consider other activities for the Thanksgiving or the holiday time, hosting virtual Thanksgiving meals with friends and family if you can. I know we might be all zoomed out at a certain point, but if you can accommodate, getting together virtually, please plan to do so. Watch television, play board games with people in your household. And I know many want to shop till you drop, but each day that I come home, there seems to be a box at both the front door and the back door. So online shopping is alive and well. And so if you can, again, limit your risk and contact to exposure by shopping online. And these are just some tips to hopefully help our community understand that we are in this to try to keep each other as safe as we can over the holiday season. And then lastly, in the spotlight, I want to take an opportunity to showcase a Red Clay family. Trinity Neal, who has released the first book, My Rainbow with Penguin Books. And I want to thank Mr. Shauna Neal and, for all of her advocacy and efforts and just really celebrating not only her beautiful children, but being a advocate for Red Clay and supportive of the work that we're doing. And we want to thank her for the shout out that she gave us, but more importantly, thank her for the wonderful work that her and her family are doing. And in closing, it would be fitting also to acknowledge Sarah McBride, who got elected to the Delaware Senator-elect for her historic election win as well. So that concludes my superintendent's report. For all of our families, again, who will be away next week in unique situations and circumstances, may you and your families have a blessed break next week.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Any questions from board members? If not, we need to move back because I skipped the consent action items, as Mr. Casper pointed out and Ms. Stevens. So let's move backwards before we go to items submitted by the board. So is there a motion to accept the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Or to approve the consent agenda, I should say? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Mr. Casper
Mr.
moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Dr. Newton seconds. Maria will take a roll call vote, please.
Dr. Bohm,
Yes.
Mr. Casper,
Yes.
Mr. Matthews,
Yes.
Dr. Newton, Yes. Ms. Sabo,
Yes.
Mr. Wilson,
Yes.
Ms. Thompson.
Yes.
Unanimous vote, motion carries.
Okay.
I also have some questions for Superintendent Green.
In relation to Mr. Green's report?
I have some questions. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So one of the things I wanted to follow up on was I had asked last month at the October board meeting if I could get a number of how many staff members had requested to work from home. And I never received a follow-up on that. So I was wondering if we have those numbers.
And I don't have them at this time, Dr. Vaughn, but I also know Ms. Stevens sent out an email to board members requesting that if anyone had any kind of outdated information requests, and we didn't get a response from any board members. So I will make sure that we capture that now. And as we follow up with Dr. Grundy, make sure that you get that.
All right, thank you. And then I had a few more things that I wanted to ask about. So it seemed like from your report, and I really appreciated the fact that you shared that there had been 31 COVID related cases in our schools and that we had a number of schools shut down. So I know we had North Star, you said had one case, so it was shut down for a week. You talked about AI Middle having 3 cases and they were shut down. And I know with Lewis, the kindergarten was shut down, but not the other grades. Do you know how many cases were there?
I don't know specifically offhand, but I believe it may have been one case. And
And then
again, the nature of what we're dealing with isn't spread in the school. It's contact tracing and who DPH is deeming to be at risk of exposure, and then the quarantine measures that we then have to follow as a result of DPH guidelines. And it's depending on the epidemiologist that you get, depending on the timing of when we get notification of that case, changes the way in which we process. And when we say cases in schools, those are notifications of folks who may have been in the school at any given point in time. Not necessarily some of these instances, a student and or staff could have been remote or may have been there for one particular day. I mean, there have been some nuances in specific cases where they were only there on 11/2, November the 2nd. And then in essence, we find out a week later and then still required to quarantine folks. So there's been a lot of challenges that we've been dealing with just in terms of, quarantining measures that have been more of the barrier that we've been dealing with and not necessarily the notification of positive cases.
So it seems like it's really an issue about quarantining people once they have possible exposure.
So once they're deemed, and so an example would be if someone had tested positive for COVID, you quarantine for 10 days. If you have been deemed close contact, you quarantine for 14 days. Even if you get a negative test over the course of that 14 days, that does not exclude you from the 14-day quarantine. You still need to quarantine. If you're a family member of someone who tested positive and they test positive and they quarantine for their 10 days, in essence, your 14 days doesn't start until their 10 days are over.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the self-screener, in essence, if I have allergy symptoms, I can go to my doctor or get a negative COVID test and actually be cleared to come. So there's a lot of guidance and nuances to these situations. And again, that's why I take my hat off to our school nurses who are helping us navigate a lot of these challenges and being truly default statewide contact tracers as they wait to get those final approval or guidance based on their investigation. And in many instances, they're provided with second and or third hand information as they provide it. So, the Department of Health is taking a real conservative approach to quarantine measures, not necessarily knowing or realizing the impact that it puts on the operational aspect of operating and running a school.
So because I know that Ms. Johnson had made this remark when she was providing public comment and other people have sent it to emails to the board, I really appreciated your report, and I appreciated the report that you sent to the board, I think on Sunday, either Saturday night or Sunday at some point. I'm wondering, can the report like that, which lists all the schools and the COVID related cases, and then what we're doing with the school, whether it's, you know, paused or closed down for a week or 2 weeks, is there a way that report can be made public for the Red Clay community? Because I know one thing people are doing is they're getting a lot of information off of social media, and then they'll call board members and say, hey, is this correct? This is what we've seen. This is what we've heard. And I think if they had an official report from the district, like the one you provided for the board, that would sort of address some of the questions that people have.
And I would say, Dr. Bohm, those questions, and while I appreciate, you know, people's ability to engage on social media, the nature of the 25th modification and notification of these cases are school-based. And so to create an alarm for a family where they're not necessarily impacted by a situation at one school, while it would be maybe nice to know, we address those situations at an individual school. And I think most often, when we're talking about one particular case, you have HIPAA and other things that we wouldn't want to inadvertently disclose someone based on the small nature of cases overall in terms of relative to the number of folks who are actually within our building. If they choose to self-disclose, that's one thing. While it is information worthy to make the board aware, I would just say, generally speaking, sending out district-wide notifications or notices based on an individual school when we're notifying the individual school community and those who are impacted by those particular situations isn't necessarily what we've done to date, and nor does the modification or report notification requirements require us to do so.
Right, I wasn't asking about requirements. I was just saying that it might be, I know we've heard from a number of people in Red Clay where they'd like more transparency about what's going on, because rightfully so, people are really scared about the raging pandemic and that report you provided to the board. So is that confidential information? Because there are no names in that report. You just gave a list.
They're all the public notifications that we send out via email to each school. So each school who sends it out is public information, but it only goes out to that particular school that's being impacted at the time.
Okay, so that report you're saying you're not comfortable making public, that you provide to the board?
That's not what I'm saying.
It's hard for me to hear you, Superintendent Green.
And your last comment was what?
I was referencing the report that you sent to the board.
The notifications of where we've had cases at individual schools?
Yeah.
You just said make that public?
I said, can you make that public?
She wants you to make that email public.
And again, Dr. Bone, we're not hiding anything. What we notice and notify the schools. If the board wants me to make a notification to district-wide for situations that don't necessarily impact families on other parts of the district, just for,
Aren't there potentially HIPAA issues involved?
and again,
as well?
our process in terms of notifying those in these situations have been the school communities that have been impacted by it. Now, if we just want to generally create broad mass notifications, I don't necessarily think that that's warranted. In my opinion, it creates more alarm where there may not be necessarily to enable to create, and it's not a means of hiding information or not being transparent. It's that we're communicating to those, and in this situation, it's such a fluid process that we get this information on a moment's notice. So the question would be, what would be the mechanism by which we would continue to notify the community? I know the majority of districts that I'm aware of, for the most part, only address it the way and manner in which we are. But if we want general notifications of, we can all see the data, we can all see it in the zip codes. I think our other challenge is mobility and race throughout our community, that we'll spend more time putting out COVID notices to families rather than those who are being immediately impacted by any notification that we send out.
All right, thank you. It's something that I think the district should think about. I also have a few other questions / remarks. All right, so one of the other things I wanted to ask, I noticed that Dr. Grundy said there were approximately 57 students in our AE model. And just today, I read an article in the News Journal, and it talked about the American Academy of Pediatrics. They've just released a report along with the Children's Hospital Association. And the report reveals that the coronavirus is infecting children now more than at any other time during the pandemic. And over 1 million children now have COVID. And they said that last week was the highest weekly total of children who were contracting the COVID virus, COVID-19. And Dr. Sally Goza said that the data is staggering and tragic. That's a quote. I also know that today, Pennsylvania released, Dr. Rachel Levine and their Secretary of Health released a report, and she said that, or a mandate rather, that people coming into PA had to test negative for COVID 72 hours prior to coming in, or they had to quarantine for 2 weeks. Now, I know that educators are exempt from that, and I know a lot of our educators live in PA, but for children who live in households where one parent may live in Delaware and the other parent might live in Pennsylvania, that may pose an issue to them if they're in the classroom in person. Another issue that might occur is that students are getting sick or family members are getting sick. So they now want to go from being in person. And the board has received a number of emails saying that initially parents had signed up for in-person instruction, but now they want to move to remote instruction. So my question is, will those students who now want to go into Zoom, will they be able to go into Zoom, or do they have to go into AE?
And so presently, if a family selected in-person, again, their decision was for in-person learning. And the question is, if they were to go into Zoom at the secondary level, in essence, it's really not an issue. The question is, what would we do at an elementary? And the reality of it is, we just requested a class size waiver for that very issue based on the pressure that's in the remote environment. And so we're continuing to work through that. We are investigating other options because, again, this is a fluid process by which we don't know what next week or 2 weeks may look like. And again, while we welcome in-person learning, it would be a challenge for us to just automatically flip families who decided that they no longer wanted to have their children in person, especially at the elementary level, to go to a Zoom platform.
Okay. And then another thing I was thinking of is we have so many wellness centers in our high school. Is there any way that we could provide COVID testing through our wellness centers? I think that's through Christiana Care.
Dr. Bone, we've looked at a number of different ways. We actually have a meeting tomorrow to really look at testing in terms of working with Dr. Pescatore through the state. My concern is it's the antigen testing, which is the rapid test, which I think in many instances isn't as reliable as curative. We've looked at various other plans and opportunities to look at testing. We can't mandate testing. While we use our school sites for testing sites, they are open to the community as well. We would love the opportunity to have school-specific testing and testing sites, and we would love for our community to embrace that strategy, to be able to do so that we could have a more robust kind of testing program, such as what Delaware State is actually doing. And granted, they have dormitories and housing where if they had the need to quarantine someone, they could be able to do so. But knowing, more credible information or data relative to a specific school would be something. So I will follow up with you after we have this meeting tomorrow with the state in terms of what they're proposing for schools and or school districts who want to look at specific testing based on this antigen testing.
All right, thank you.
I want to say one comment. The comment about notifications that are wider than schools. General notifications tend to get used on social media to stir up anxiety. And at a time like this, when we all have quite enough to deal with, I don't think we should be doing that. My second concern is, if I was that one case at that school, and I found out that was going to the district, I would be extremely upset. I understand if it's going out to my school and my community, but district-wide, under no circumstances. And I also don't think that our parents in our community really understood that it's not just the case, it's also the contact tracing. It's when those 10 days start, it's when those 14 days start. And that's a wide group of people. And I don't think people really understand the guidelines that DPH has put us under and how strict those guidelines are and what we have to do in our schools. And that's why it's so difficult. And that's why it takes, that's why Mr. Green and his staff have to react so quickly. And we have to give them a lot of credit for what they're doing. They deserve a round of applause. I mean, it's incredible what they have to deal with day in and day out. I mean, I'm doing it at the university level, or I watch it, but what our public schools are doing is just unbelievable. And so I think we need to support them with what they're doing. It's an unbelievable situation. It's extremely stressful, and they're doing an unbelievable job.
Okay, thank you.
I
So,
think Mr. Matthews, I see him in the queue. I'm not sure if he has something to add to the conversation.
I didn't
Yes,
get a text.
Thank you, Superintendent Green. I do want to add a comment as well. And thank you, Dr. Bohm, for your questions. It really helped clarify some of the questions that I had and the community had, and along with the questions that were provided in public comment and those that were emailed to us, texted to us, and phoned to us. One concern that I do have with the notifications is that I know that we had a number of emails and a number of constituents reaching out to us. Is the notification process to this board? If we're not going to notify the public, I would at least like the board to be notified when we're going to be experiencing school closures and so forth. And I think we've had some dialogue about how we're going to manage and handle that notification process in the future. But for the record, there were school closures without board notification. There were things that did happen without this board being notified. And I did find that to be very problematic. I was finding out things, through my neighbors, through, teachers and staff. So if we could get more live time updates from the district, that would be greatly appreciated. And secondly, in terms of notifying the public, do we have a legal opinion? If we don't have a legal opinion, could we get a legal opinion on what parameters, what we could look into potentially in terms of a notification process? I would be curious to see what legal has to say.
And it's clear in the 25th modification of the governor's order in terms of what we are supposed to be doing with it. But if you want me to get a legal opinion on the governor's order, I'll get a legal opinion on the governor's order.
Thank you.
Okay, now we move on to items submitted by the board. Does anybody?
Hi, Kathy, President Thompson.
I'll start. How's that?
I don't know. I think Mr. Matthews was still speaking.
Oh, was he? I'm sorry. I didn't hear anything.
No worries. I
didn't hear you. I'm sorry, Jose.
No worries at all. President Thompson, I do have items. I'm fine with whatever order.
No, go ahead. You go right ahead. That's fine.
Sure, thank you. So the first thing that I have is I wanted to follow up with an analysis that one of our board members brought up at the previous meeting, at the October 21st, 2020 meeting. I'm ready for that analysis. Can we hear from what the district has generated in terms of a report? I'm ready for the
analysis. Are you referencing?
The analysis, so the request at the October 21st, 2020 board meeting was to look at there was a board request to look at an analysis in terms of how much teaching content was lost with the current school structure. So that was a request from the last board meeting.
And so Dr. Bohm asked the question around what would be But that would be a meta-analysis and a full-on case study, and not anything that we would be able to turn around in a month to determine learning loss. And I don't know, I know Dr. Bohm did raise that issue that she wanted to see, and I don't know what the specific one is. And again, I just want to remind the board that I did have Ms. Stevens reach out prior to this meeting and ask board members if there was any information or documentation that wasn't provided to you, so that we wouldn't be in this situation as we're dealing with schools and everything else, not to be in a position not to have that information, because it was raised during last board meeting that things have left unresponded to. And we did send that information out to the board members to make sure. But I think in Dr. Bone's request last month, Mr. Matthews, it was referencing learning loss. And Dr. Bohm, I don't know if you want to clarify what you specifically said, but I know that that would be more of a longer term study than something to turn around in a month, especially given the fact that students who are in person versus those who are remote in this current hybrid environment really have only been in that environment for 2 weeks. And the first week was a transition week where at elementary, they were only there for a day. Secondary, they were only there for pretty much a day because of the cohort model. And then this past week was really the only 4 week. And we're going on that second full week of being in school. So again, that would be a more longer term study, but if there's something specific to, A, research, we do have a partnership with Hanover Research, where we already begun looking at learning loss from the spring. Part of that challenge is there aren't any state data or state diagnostic data to be able to draw a conclusion from. And so we're using internal metrics and internal data to really look at learning loss. What we have discovered and know that remediation isn't necessarily the angle or challenge. You want to accelerate learning. A good study of that would be post-Katrina, where a lot of folks look to remediate learning, when in actuality, you should be accelerating learning, and then really use diagnostic skills to figure out where those learning gaps are and provide interventions and supports to make up for that learning loss for students. So if that's what you're referencing, again, I think that would be more of a longer term study than something that we would be able to turn around in a short period of time, given the fact that students are in different learning environments and haven't been in that for a period of time for us to actually diagnose it. One of the things that I can tell you, just looking at grade reporting and mark reporting in terms of grades, we are seeing a decrease across the board in terms of failure rates. And I think a lot of that has to do with learning environments, and that's across the board, especially at the secondary level, as students try to navigate this. If they're in a remote environment and don't necessarily have a parent, caregiver, family member there to keep them on task with the various Zoom times and check-ins and course loads and demands that they have. But again, I think based on an analysis, we take more of a long-term study to really figure out any kind of gaps in learnings that I think Dr. Bohm was alluding to, but I could be wrong in what her ask was.
And she would like to be unmuted, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I just wanted to say to Superintendent Green and Mr. Matthews, thank you for remembering that I had asked for that, because I had forgotten. I'm showing my age here, but I'm glad both of you remembered. So I think what I was asking about was, and I think the specific conversation had to do with the amount of time it would take students, especially in the elementary schools, to go to their cubbies, to wash their hands, to hand sanitize, to do all those things that they normally could sort of do in unison or do in a group. Now they were doing it independently because they had to have this space in between them. So I just wanted to see how much time was lost during the day for now all of these independent activities to occur instead of them being able to do it as a group.
So
Thanks
basically,
for remembering.
loss of instructional time due to increased time in transition.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Well, thank you, Darrell, and thank you, Dr. Bohm, for the clarification. And Superintendent Green, I do appreciate you starting the process on the analysis. In my item submitted by the board, I would like to submit an update on where we are with that analysis at the next meeting. And point of order, I want to clarify that this request is being made in a public meeting, and this is the only time in public where I will make this request, and we'll have a follow-up at the next meeting. So having the online discussions, offline discussions, I do have concerns with doing that. So I just want to call a point of order on the process. When a request is made in public, it's made in a public setting for the community and for transparency purposes for everyone to see. So I'm not really sure what the process is on doing offline communications on different follow-ups. There's a cabinet that is afforded to the superintendent's office, and people do need to follow up with the board requests as appropriate and as assigned. So the next item that I have is I do appreciate Dr. Bohm bringing up the HR update on the number of employees who have been allowed to work from home and working from home. I know that was made at the last board meeting last month. So we did not receive that report, and I look forward to seeing that report next month. I know the community wants to see that report next month as well. The other follow-up I had was it was proposed and presented that a 6 feet distancing policy be enacted and taken into consideration by the district. If there is any update from the policy committee on whether or not that was considered and discussed, that would be greatly appreciated. In terms of my committee reports, right, we did, since the last meeting, have a CAB fund committee. Currently, there are some challenges and some struggles with that coronavirus and COVID-19, the pandemic has created with fundraising for some of the specialty programs that we provide with CAB and the funds generated to try to close the gaps and inequities that we face within some of our magnet programs, if not all of our magnet programs. There is going to be an event in January. It's going to be a virtual whiskey tasting. So definitely, if you're able to give, I know that this is a time of the holidays and sometimes people can feel generous. You know, we definitely are looking for support for those who can give. And we always sincerely appreciate any donations and contributions from the community. For the facilities committee, since the last meeting, we did not have a meeting. That committee meets quarterly, and the next meeting will be on December 14th, 2020. And I look forward to giving an update on where we are with the facilities at the next meeting. And lastly, I wanted to congratulate one of our constituents here in Red Clay, the president-elect Joe Biden. I think this is definitely a very historic mark for Red Clay. I don't think we've ever had a sitting president live within our district. So I think it's something really to be noted and celebrated, and definitely very excited. I'm sure many of you on this call are as well, and honored to see that President-elect Joe Biden has been appointed to the position he's been in. So that concludes the rest of my report, and I yield my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matthews. I'll go next, okay? Is that, unless do you want to? Okay. So I have a couple of things to report on. I did, I attended the board policy committee on 10/28, which was interesting. We had students from 5 of our 7 high schools who were very engaged and additive. They wanted to take turns being the representative, and they wanted to develop a group to meet as a team prior to our meetings so they could get input to provide from all schools. They were very professional. It was very additive. Their comments were very welcomed. I attended the combined boards on 11/5. As Mr. Green mentioned, it was very well attended. Dr. Susan Bunning spoke about all the things that Mr. Green mentioned, so I won't repeat it. I did find a couple of statistics that she mentioned very interesting. That we have 141,000 public school students in Delaware, and about 19 to 20% are special needs. So basically 1 in 5. I thought that was really an interesting statistic. As was the statistic that we are seeing a big uptick in students with autism. It used to be 1 in 400, and now it's 1 in 36. So services are desperately needed. She also mentioned that part of this settlement, you know, in addition to the funding we were going to receive for special ed and for EL, for poverty, things like that, and for the recruitment and retention of high quality educators in high need schools, there also was going to be a county ombudsman program. The state would contract with a non-state worker to deal with any issues that arise in high need schools, be that disparate discipline, differential treatment, disparate access to programs, etc. So I thought those were interesting points that she mentioned. I attended the CFRC, as I always do, on 11/10. Our expenditures are on track, which is good. Revenue surprisingly was on track. Local revenues are not bad. To date, we've received 99% of local funds. Now that will lower as charter and choice funds are included in that and they'll be transferred out, but still we were surprised based on the taxes. We seem to be receiving them, so that was good news. And we heard a little bit about the pop-up classrooms being very popular, about over 100 of them. Many were additional and we're also getting additional outside classrooms that are in the works. I had an opportunity because I was over in district office signing contracts to really see for the first time the unit count process. So I got to see the sausage making. I have to really give credit to each and every one of the individual administrators. I saw Dr. Celestin there, I saw Mr. Golder there, and I saw Miss Bewley there, along with a couple of others who really have to go through student by student and actually put hands-on work that the students submitted. So it was really quite an undertaking, and it's really an extensive and exhaustive process, which I really had not fully understood before. So that was great. I want to congratulate our fellow board member, Jason Casper, because he has been elected as a VP to the Delaware School Boards Association, I think in large measure due to his commitment to that organization, which has been very helpful for Red Clay. So congratulations, Mr. Casper. I know that will help us out a lot. So thank you. And lastly, I did have a meeting with Kelly Furco and Steve Fackenthal from the RCEA. They met with Ashley and me about some RCEA concerns. They recognize that the RCEA and board have good relationships and they want to continue that along with good dialogue. I offered to meet with RCEA members and the suggestion from them was that I attend the rep council meeting on December 1st. So I will be doing that and really kind of explaining the role of the board and kind of listening, and other board members may want to do that at other times. So that is what I have to say. So I yield the floor to whomever is next.
I just had a couple things that I wanted to mention.
Okay.
So one of the items that I submitted was a resolution on the role of the board. It was mentioned in a couple of the public comments tonight. And the purpose of the resolution is not to shirk the duties of the board, but to outline what our duty is, which is to formulate policy and not be involved in the day-to-day operations of the district so much. And given that there's going to be a lot of changes most likely over the next few months with how the virus might spread or might change, the need for the board to vote on day-to-day changes of how the reopening plan goes is not really within our policy setting. It's a day-to-day operation that we trust Mr. Green as our superintendent to make the best decisions for the district. We trust him to work with his team, and we need to let them work the way that they should. That's not saying we shouldn't hear feedback from constituents or that we shouldn't ask questions. It's saying we need to let him and his team do their job, and we need to do our job. So that's the purpose of that resolution. It's not so that we step back and we become less involved. It's that we make sure that we're involved in the proper way. The other thing that I just wanted to mention, we've talked a lot about how busy our educators are, our administrators, our district office. And I think that when the board requests information, we really need to be careful and cognizant of the time that it's going to take. I'm going to mention the one request of lack or loss in learning during the day. That's nearly impossible to figure out because every school is going to do it differently. The way that my daughter's second grade class transitioned is going to be different than the way my daughter's fifth grade class. And that's really a request that doesn't serve much purpose because fact of the matter is kids are going to have to wash their hands more. They're going to have to do these things that have been put out by DPH, regardless of whether it takes longer or not. So I just think that we need to be really careful of how we ask the district administrators to spend their time. And then the last thing, I just wanted to mention that when we are elected to the position of a board member, we all read the handbook and we agree that we're going to abide by it. And I just wanted to kind of put it out there that one of the things we agree to is that when a vote takes place, we support it publicly. That's not saying we're always going to agree with it, but publicly we should come across as a united board because we are the face of the district. And when emails are responded to with disparaging marks about how board members voted, it shows a dissension, and that's the last thing our district needs to be presented to people. So I just wanted to put it out there that we need to remember that once a vote is made, we need to support it, and we need to do what we can to make it work and not fight against it once the vote takes place.
Thank you, Ms. Sabo. And so the motion that you put in will be available for a vote next meeting.
Right.
Correct. Okay, thank you. I know Dr. Bohm indicated, Dr. Bohm wants to, do you want to go first? Go ahead, Dr. Bohm.
So I attended the diversity committee meeting that was held on 10/27/2020. And it was a short meeting. Educators highlighted lesson plans and curricula that they were using for our K-3 learners. They also were discussing lesson plans that they were actually creating in small groups. So that was nice to see that Red Clay educators were actually coming up with their own curricula to use in the classrooms. Holly Golder gave a report on grant opportunities for Red Clay to do some anti-bias training. And then there was talk about Dr. Kendi, who was actually doing a Zoom conference that Red Clay was invited to. I think we had unlimited number of seats, and Dr. Kendi wrote a book, and it's called How to Be an Anti-Racist. And in the committee meeting, they were talking about one of his main points is that when someone is labeled a racist or something is called racist, that the opposite of racist is not I am not racist, right? So he makes the argument that the opposite of racism is doing anti-racism work. And so that's what his book focuses on. So one of the key things that he discusses is the fact that we have all of these structures like our educational policy and our disciplinary policies that are racist at their core. And he asks people to re-envision and reimagine what a new system would look like and work towards dismantling these old systems of oppression. So a lot of people in the committee, they were reading the book, they were, talking about it, and they were going to participate in his Zoom lecture that was held, I think, last week. That was the update.
Thank you. Okay, Dr. Newton.
So Ms. Sabo, it's your recommendation that, or your intent that next month we will discuss your proposal?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. So next month, we're going to discuss your resolution?
Yes.
Okay.
Can I add something to what Ms. Sabo had mentioned about requiring significant superintendent time? So I knew it was jiggling around in my mind, and I looked at Board Policy 2009. The third to the last burger dot says, upon request, the superintendent shall provide board members with information about any particular area of district operations unless the request will involve significant staff time. Requests that entail compilation of material not readily available or significant staff time shall require the board's approval. So I think we need to understand if there's significant staff time involved, and we'll have to take a board vote on it when requests are made.
Right.
Okay, to be consistent with policy. Anybody else?
I have a question.
Nope.
Dr. Bohm has a question.
Oh,
I have a
Dr. has a
question.
question. Yeah, go ahead.
So Ashley said when she was talking about her resolution that we were going to vote on it next month. And then Faith just said we're going to talk about it next month. So I just wanted some clarification on that.
It'll be both, because there'll be a motion to approve it and we'll discuss it prior to the vote, just like we always do. So the motion will be on the floor. We'll discuss it and we'll vote.
So the process usually is that a board member submits an item 1 month. The next month there's discussion and community input. And then the third month is when we vote on them. And that's been—
It's 2 months. We introduce it 1 month, we vote on it the next.
No, that's not how we've done it.
Yeah,
Yes, it is.
No, it's we introduce it, we talk about it, and then we vote on it.
No, just like your motion that you had on the SROs, it was introduced in June. We voted on it in July.
But I brought it up before June, I think.
No, the
No, you
motion was
didn't.
introduced in June.
Okay.
Ms. Thompson's correct.
It's a 2-month process. Mr. Casper, did you, you already spoke, or did you have something to say?
Yeah, I just was going to give an update. I did attend the DSBA meeting, as you mentioned, and Dr. Dr. Marinucci did provide an update regarding the lawsuit. And it was noted that the approved settlement still requires funding by the legislature. So if that funding fails, the settlement will be voided and the lawsuit will have to continue. So that's the update. So although it's been ruled on, the actual funding from it hasn't been approved by the legislature at this time.
Yeah.
So.
Good update. You're right. Okay. Anything else?
So I have a
There are
question.
information items as well, which for next meeting. And
Dr. Bowman.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Dr. Baum.
So Kathy, at board meeting last Tuesday, you said that a board member was going to bring up a motion to make all meetings return to in person. Is that still going to happen?
I don't know.
Because you raised it at the board planning last week.
I said there might be, correct? Do you remember hearing that?
I remember hearing you say that a board member was going to raise up
I
a
said
motion
there might
to
be.
return to in person. So I just wanted to know if that was going to come up or not.
I don't know.
Well, if it's not, I just want to say I'm very glad that the board took the feedback of the community and is deciding to remain in the hybrid mode.
Anything else? Hearing nothing, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Ms. Sabo moves. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you, everyone, for attending. Have a very good Thanksgiving. And I hope you have a very
Happy
blessed
Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Night.